Welcome to Elevated Practice, where we interview masters and mavericks within the field of holistic medicine and uncover unconventional stories in the field of health and wellness. I'm your host, Gretchen Badami, and every episode I'll be interviewing clinicians, scholars, entrepreneurs, and educators who share their wisdom and ideas with you. Are you ready to elevate your practice? Let's begin today's episode. Let's pause for a moment to extend a big thank you to our sponsor, Handcraft Health. I prescribe a lot of herbal medicine in my practice, and quite frankly, I don't want to spend the overhead keeping hundreds of herbs and supplements on hand. Since the pandemic, I do a lot of telehealth consults and ship patients their prescriptions. Handcraft Health has been my lifesaver. It allows me to have a successful and streamlined practice and saves me money and office space. I am not tech savvy, but the platform is really straightforward for me to write and easy for my patients to pay online and receive their orders at home. It's free for practitioners to open a Handcraft Health account. It's just handcraft.health and only takes a few minutes to sign up. It's one of the easiest choices you'll make to do what you do best. And now, back to our episode. Hello, and welcome to our episode of Ghosts and Goo. I am thrilled and honored to welcome back my colleague and teacher, Dr. Lorraine Wilcox. She has been licensed for over 35 years, and she wrote her dissertation on moxibustion in the Ming Dynasty. She is self-taught in Chinese, and she's been teaching in universities and colleges since 1990. She teaches continuing education classes, both in person and online, and she's a renowned classical Chinese translator and expert scholar, having authored and translated at least 10 books, and soon to be more, as she explores her passion for researching and reviving Chinese medicine. In season 1 of our podcast, episode 2, I interviewed Lorraine to find out how she became interested in translating ancient Chinese medical texts and talked with her about some of her translations and her areas of specialty. And near the end of that episode, we spontaneously joked about having her return to do a Halloween episode discussing ghosts and goo. And later on, I thought more about that and thought it would be fun and timely to explore some of the historical textual roots of East Asian medicine from a time when in China, the cultural filial piety and the belief in ghosts and spirits and the unknown was conceptualized to have an influence on people's physical and mental health. So today, Lorraine is going to teach us all about that and also discuss the relevance of these understandings to the historical medicine. So thank you, Lorraine, for indulging me on this topic and the timeliness of this interview.
It's going to be fun, Gretchen.
Thank you so much. Okay. So to get started, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of historical understanding to situate the information we're going to talk about today. I would love it if you could educate both our listeners and myself on some of the historical roots of the ideas of ghosts and goo. I just was thinking all the way back to the Shang Empire, 1800 years, BCE, when they incorporated a lot of ideas of ancestors and demons and disease being curses from ancestors. But can you flush a little bit of that out and then bring us to the era we're going to talk about, which is around 200 CE in the post-Han era?
So the Shang dynasty is like the earliest. Well, there's a kind of legendary dynasty before that, the Xia dynasty. But the Shang dynasty, we have a lot of evidence because they found oracle bones that came from this time period. And once they figured out the writing and how to read it, then we had a lot of information about the Shang dynasty. And their religion was ancestor worship, if that's what you want to call it. They felt that, at least the nobles felt that stuff happened because the ancestors were either blessing them or unhappy with them. And at that time, disease was looked at as a curse by the ancestors, but so is famine or floods or crop failure or, any disaster. The oracle bones are really interesting. One of the things we're going to talk about, Gu, that character occurs in the oracle bones, although it's not exactly clear what it meant at that time, if it means the same thing as it developed over periods of time. So back then, all medicine was ancestral medicine. If you were sick, it was because your ancestors were displeased with you, so you had to do something to make them happy, like make offerings or stuff like that. The ancestors were very real to those people and part of their daily life. So that's kind of the beginning. There was no Chinese medicine as we know it today at that time, because it was just like, oh, my ancestors unhappy, let me make a sacrifice for them. That was the medicine. When the Shang was overthrown and the Zhou dynasty came about and the Zhou took power, they were a different people, a different culture, and they still honored their ancestors, but their methods of knowing were different. And so that's actually the time when the I Ching, the Book of Changes, developed. And instead of doing tortoiseshell divination to ask the ancestors, hey, what's the problem? They used yarrow stalks, stalks of a certain plant, to do a calculation to come up with an answer in early versions of the I Ching. Over this whole period of time of the Zhou dynasty, little by little, medicine started to develop to become a more natural thing. So, yin-yang theory, five-element theory developed, but everybody still believed in what we would call supernatural influences. So there were still worries about ghosts and demons and still the influence of the ancestors, but it just wasn't the primary thing anymore. And Gu, some of the old history books about that period of the Zhou dynasty talk about Gu.
So there's the ghosts and the ancestors, and then just now you're mentioning the gu. Can you tell us what gu is supposed to mean? Like, I know that there's a particular, pictogram for the gu and how they understood it.
So Gu is, just in case you're wondering, is spelled Gu in English, and it doesn't really have a translation, so we're just going to call it Gu. And the character itself, which was in the oracle bones, is a picture of a dish, and inside of it are three chong. And so we have to discuss chong. Maybe I'll use bugs as a translation, but chong is any creepy crawly thing. So it includes bugs,
Okay.
both in the sense of insects, but also just like today, if you're getting sick, oh, I think I caught a bug. It doesn't have to be a visible insect. It can include snakes and toads and scorpions and just any creepy crawly thing, and including some supernatural creepy crawly things. So there are three insects in a dish, and apparently in the oracle bones, it could mean snake soup, because, three snakes in a dish, that you can make soup, but it also seemed to include some kind of disease thing at other times. And in the Zhou dynasties, there's a story where some noble guy calls a doctor in, and the doctor says, oh, I'm sorry, you've got gu. And he says, like, what? And the doctor says, you've been too close to the women's quarters, meaning sex.
Mm,
Um, but he says, it's beyond, it can't be treated, it can't be cured, you're going to die. And
wow.
so one of these really early references that's not from the oracle bones, it has to do with women. And there is an association with women because, they like to blame everything on us, don't they?
Right.
It's like the guy can't keep it in his pants, but he's blaming the woman. So anyway.
This is actually very interesting. We still have a lot more fleshing out to do of these ideas, but do you think that having that relationship with women and then having sex had something to do with women being impure and the blood aspect and them associating that with disease or like STDs? Is that something that would have been considered like goo?
there's not enough information, or at least I haven't read enough to really kind of answer that. It doesn't seem to have to do with menstrual blood. So,
Okay.
oh, I was talking about, so what is goo? So that's really early stuff about goo, but also another diverging idea of goo is that, remember, it's three insects in a dish. And there's this idea that somebody who wanted to do bad magic, evil magic, would get a whole bunch of chong, which could include snakes and toads and scorpions and bugs and toxic living things. Put them in a dish, seal them up, and let them all fight each other. And after a certain period of time, they'd open it up, and one would survive, like last chance standing, right? And then somehow they'd make that into some kind of poison. And then if that was put in your food, you would be under the power of the person who made it. And you would probably die. And some people would die very quickly, and some people would take months or years of suffering. But somehow, when that person died, all their possessions would go to the goo master. And so that's the main idea of goo in later times, but that's rooted back in this time. And it was mostly women who were doing this to men because the so I'm getting ahead of myself, but like in the Ming dynasty, there are all of these warnings. If you're a northern person, and by that they mean man, and you are sent to the south because you're a merchant or you're a government official that's been sent to the South, there are all these other ethnic groups in the South that they were afraid of because of uprisings and because they might have weird practices and stuff like that. There are also a lot of weird diseases in the South because it's hot and humid. And so there's malaria, but there's like a whole bunch of other kind of weird diseases. So if you're a northern person, meaning a man, and you go to the South, be careful of these women, because these women are going to start a relationship with you, and then they're going to poison you with goo. And the story is, so this guy has come to me and he's like sweet talking me and telling me, oh, I'm going to marry you, but I have to go back and take care of business and then I'll come back and marry you. So she feeds him some goo, which he doesn't know. And then when he's about to leave, she says, you know what? If you come back within 6 months, I have the antidote. If you don't come back in 6 months, you're going to suffer and you're going to die. And so I think, there may not have been like a lot of goo going on, but this was a way these women could scare the men who were lying to them to get some revenge on them. And then they were so scared of it because it was really a thing that people believed. And I'm not saying it didn't exist. I don't know if it existed or didn't exist, but these guys were really afraid of it. So again, they're blaming the women, but I can see it from the woman's point of view. Like, this guy comes in and sweet talks me, and now he's just going to leave me, maybe I'm pregnant.
We have so many examples throughout history where, number one, men were afraid of women and accused them of being witches or sorceresses. I think the understated power, which women have had in many ways, was frightening to men. But then also, as you said, given their lower status, the women had to do whatever they could to actually scare the men into behaving. That's fascinating. I'm going to get right back to ghosts and goo in just a second, but do you think that there also could have been a bacterial component? I'm thinking about our understanding of goo now, and like, were they really festering in something that was maybe bacteria and actually poisoning people? Is there any evidence of that?
So what a lot of people think is that people used to have intestinal parasites,
Yeah.
which are also called chong.
Okay.
And apparently when somebody dies, this is kind of gross, but when somebody dies, they start coming out of various orifices because
Yeah.
they have no more business in a dead host. And then it's like so creepy that people couldn't imagine it was like a natural thing and wanted to blame someone. And so
Yeah.
some of this could be parasites for no other reason than they ate meat that wasn't properly cooked or whatever. That's what some of this could be, and they just had to blame it on something. It's creepy. It's, weird. It's gross. It's like, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's part of what people think, is that it was an explanation for certain types of parasitic infections where there were visible worms and stuff.
Yes.
Um, it is possible that people tried to practice it. Was it effective? I don't know. In all my medicine making stuff, that's not one I've ever tried.
Maybe that should be your next book.
Tend to be, I'm not vegetarian with my food, but like I prefer plant herbs. Besides, I don't have any guy want to come back to me. I'm done with that
You
aspect of
you
my
never
life.
know,
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, okay, so this was some of the understanding of goo. Before we get into some more of the things that the texts say and some of the ideas about how this was addressed and treated, I wanna ask you, so when we have the idea of ghosts and goo, and ghosts and this idea of ancestors, demons, divination, did this came from what we now call Taoist aspects as well? This was incorporated into that aspect of spiritual practice or no?
Think ghosts and goo were stuff that like everybody worried about. The more Confucian you are, the less you're going to pay attention to ghosts and spirits.
Mm,
Confucius said, respect ghosts and spirits, but keep a distance from them. But that doesn't mean that people didn't believe, but they probably weren't going to practice anything or go to a medium or stuff like that if they were purely Confucian. But it's a false dichotomy to say Taoist or Confucian, because first off, people practice aspects of both. And secondly, there's lots of folk religion and local
yeah.
religions and local cults. And so I think this was all throughout, and even Confucians, some of them wrote about it. Like Zhang Jibin, a famous Ming Dynasty doctor, was not really very Taoist. He was much more Confucian leaning, but he wrote huge section on goo and mentioned ghosts and stuff like that. I do want to say not all the doctors believed in this stuff, first off. And secondly, not all doctors even wrote about this stuff. And the doctors that did write about this stuff, it would be a very small section of the long book. This wasn't a big part of Chinese medicine.
Say you have a patient who has what you would diagnose as either a ghost or a goo. Would the type of doctor who treated it be different depending on whether they thought it was a ghost or a goo? Would it be a different person who would treat one versus the other?
People might have their specialties, but also people might go to a doctor and a shaman and some other kind of priest and some granny who's got a reputation for being able to deal with it. So it's not like they went to one person necessarily. If they
Ah.
had a problem and it wasn't getting fixed, they might not even go to a doctor at all. They might go to a Taoist priest.
And if it was a Taoist priest and it was a ghost, let's say, what sort of treatment would they prescribe? Would they give an incantation or would they give medicine or what would they do to the person
Different
if they had a ghost?
Different things. So first off, ghosts are considered very yin. They're from the yin realms. They don't like yang. They don't like brightness. They don't like daytime. They don't like clarity. They don't like warmth. And one thing as a general principle is use yang to kind of banish them, whether that's very yang herbs or whether that's like, oh, you live in such a dark, dingy, damp place. You need to move to a place that, has better characteristics.
Yeah.
They definitely might use incantations and talismans, which can be written and then burnt and then mixed with water and the person drinks it, or it could be pasted over their door, over their bed, or it could be folded into a little thing and worn on their body. Taoist priests or a shaman might in the air draw a talisman over a person or draw it on their body without ink, but just with their hands while chanting an incantation. Another thing that starts to happen in the Jin and Yuan dynasties is that I've got some translations from a Dr. Zhang Zihe, and people are saying, oh, this person has a ghost. And he's saying, no, they don't. They have phlegm. And phlegm is a yin substance. And
Ah,
we know, we've studied Chinese medicine, that when phlegm affects the heart, it makes confusion, delusions, hallucinations. And today we talk about that as mental illness. And so imagine a schizophrenic who's hearing voices, they're going to think that person is talking to a ghost when it's really, for us, voices in their head. But again, in Chinese medicine, that's phlegm, a really yin substance. Another thing is to drastically do things to get rid of phlegm. Like back then, they made people vomit a lot and stuff like that
mm.
to get the phlegm out.
So this is the Jin and the Yuan dynasties. What time period would this be where they started to think, "Oh, maybe it's not a ghost. Maybe we have a descriptor for this that is something not demonic."
So this is as far as my research has gone. There could be earlier stuff that I haven't encountered, but this is about 900 years ago. The Jin and the Song dynasty happened at the same time. This Jin was in the north and the Song was in the south.
So they were starting to then have an understanding and say, "This is something that we can actually treat." And around this time, there are books where they have herbs that they're saying we can treat these sorts of things. We might not be able to treat a ghost with herbs, but we could treat a phlegm with herbs. So they're giving it a new name and then saying they can treat it.
Yeah, Zhang Zihe is really funny. He's like a disruptor. He goes in, he's not afraid to break things, and he's just got a really interesting personality. There's one case I've translated where he literally, somebody says, oh, this person has a ghost, and he says, ghosts, my ass. I mean, he really uses the word for a donkey, you know?
Yeah.
Mm. Right. He's saying that's a lot of BS. And then he, of course, makes them vomit a bunch because that's what he was into.
Right, right. Get out the phlegm with an emetic, right? So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So if it was a ghost, at some point they started saying, okay, well, it used to be talismans, it used to be incantations. Now maybe we can use some herbs. I also was thinking, I was actually this morning, I was looking at Nigel Weissman's book, Grasping the Wind. There's like 28 different points that have not their main names that we use now, but alternate names that have ghost, like Gui in the name. Is that also coming from a time when they still believe that either by needling or probably, I'm assuming more likely bleeding, these points that they could let out the spirit or the demon? Do you know anything about the names as well?
So first off, moxa is a big thing because remember we're adding yang.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
And then there's Sun Tzu Miao's so-called 13 ghost points, but
Yeah.
actually in Chen Jinfang, Sun Tzu Miao attributed them to Bian Cui, a much earlier legendary doctor. So even though we call them Sun Tzu Miao's ghost points, he called them Bian Cui's ghost points. So all of those 13 points have their usual name in acupuncture, but they also have an alternate name that has ghost in the name.
Mm.
And so that accounts for about half. And, there's some other points. Usually for many of these points, you would do moxa on them. There's like the hand ghost crying point, which is basically lung 11.
Uh-huh.
And there's the foot ghost crying point, which is spleen
Ah,
1.
ah,
And these were points that were used for this kind of stuff. But in
yes.
my research, I've really found that the patient's family will say it's a ghost. And the doctor, you can tell, does not always believe that it's a ghost. Or ghost can mean not just a literal ghost, but somebody who's acting like they're talking to a ghost. In a lot of the medical stuff, it will say as if there were a ghost. It doesn't just say there is a
Ah,
ghost. It says as if or like
ah,
a
okay.
ghost. So you can tell that the doctor has a certain amount of skepticism. They may still believe that some cases are ghosts, but you could still tell that some of the things other people are saying ghosts, they're saying it's like a ghost. And
Ah,
it might be today's mental illness, but there are
yeah.
also times when there's some weird disease with very strange symptoms that they attribute to ghosts, even if it's not necessarily mental illness.
Okay. What would some examples of those be?
Oh, like a wasting condition, even things like tuberculosis had some
Mm.
supernatural attachments to it by some people.
Some things like viruses or
Yeah.
bacteria, like things that they didn't have an explanation for how the person acquired it, so they would say it was a ghost?
That could be part of it, but there are lots of things like common cold and flu that we say are virus, and they didn't attribute those to ghosts. So it's
Okay.
not like all virus or all bacteria are ghosts. There is a word that basically means an invisible insect, so it's almost like a mythical thing, and that was sometimes used in relation to tuberculosis. They knew that if one person in the family got it, often a bunch of people would eventually get it and it would wipe out the whole family, and they explained that by an invisible bug thing sometimes. I'm not saying all the time, but in some books they talk about this invisible bug, which to
Uh,
us would be a germ of some
yeah.
sort.
So at some point, the idea of the ghosts started to become supplanted by the idea of either we have an explanation for this and it's an external invasion or it's one of the pathogenic factors, or the idea of goo, which is okay, we still don't have an explanation. We don't know what it is, but it's of a physical origin and it's not an ancestor or a ghost or a demon. Is that
So the problem with that thinking is it's not that people stopped believing the first stuff.
yeah.
It's just that now they're alternate theories. So doctors are going to focus on the more tangible medical things that can be done because
Yeah.
that's what doctors do. But in folk beliefs, people today, even in the West, believe in ghosts and that ghosts can possess or haunt somebody. And it it didn't replace the earlier theories, but it became more prevalent to look at things as more medical.
Well, and certainly we still have this in this day and age if which someone needs to go see a psychologist or a therapist because they need to deal with something that's more ephemeral and emotional in nature versus going to their doctor for something that so now that we're talking about what different types of disorders someone might have or how they would diagnose these, I'm interested in how they would treat the goo and how the books describe the goo and what sort of problems would be associated with goo because that's what we can really
Yeah.
treat. We can't necessarily treat a ghost at this point, but we might still be seeing goo, right?
I mean, I think we could treat somebody who believed they had ghost possession. I don't know if we could treat them 100% successfully, but we still could treat any of this. There are treatments for it. But as far as goo goes, there was a lot of emphasis on preventing goo. So there's writing, if you're in the South and you have to eat in somebody's house, then bring a whole head of garlic and eat that. Or here's an incantation that you can chant that will prevent goo. Or there's one when you go in their house, take the chopsticks and bang on the table before you eat. There's a story of a monk and some guy are traveling west through maybe a desert region and they're starving and thirsty and they come upon a farmhouse, but somehow they can smell that there's goo there. I don't know. How do you smell goo? I never saw any description of that, but they're so hungry and thirsty. They know they'll die if they don't stop there and eat, but they're afraid of the goo if they do stop there. And the monk says, don't worry, I have an incantation that will protect us. And so they go and he chants it and some little spider crawls out of their food and he kills it. And that's supposed to be successful. So there's a lot of discussion of preventive things for goo. But if you already have goo, there are some formulas in later books for goo. And most of the formulas are based on zusuye and boha. So like perilla and peppermint.
Mm,
And not only those two, but those are like the chief herbs of the formulas. And
mm.
those are herbs that deal with dampness and foulness and things that smell bad and stuff
I
like
mean,
that.
members of the mint family, right? Yeah, so
Yeah. Oh, there's one story where they use jagung, just jagung.
yeah, platycode and radix, yeah, the balloon flower, and that's
Yeah.
interesting because that herb guides right up to the throat, and all those ghost points that are located right around the throat.
Isn't jagung anti-inflammatory?
Yeah. In my reading about goo, there seems to be goo affecting digestion, goo affecting the brain, the Shen, its association with neurological disorders, and sometimes those are treated together, and sometimes they seem to be separate.
Are you talking about Heiner Fruehauf stuff? What source?
Heiner Frohoff, yeah.
Oh, people can take ancient thoughts and connect them to modern things, and not everybody's gonna agree. He posits that Lyme disease is goo, and other certain types of things. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but he's doing stuff with it that isn't historically there. I'm
Mhm.
not saying it's wrong because we take a lot of things from past and we update them for modern times. So I'm not saying he's wrong, but I can't address that because I'm more about the historical stuff.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So it's not in the text in that way.
Let's pause for a moment to extend a big thank you to our sponsor, Handcraft Health. I prescribe a lot of herbal medicine in my practice, and quite frankly, I don't want to spend the overhead keeping hundreds of herbs and supplements on hand. Since the pandemic, I do a lot of telehealth consults and ship patients their prescriptions. Handcraft Health has been my lifesaver. It allows me to have a successful and streamlined practice and saves me money and office space. I am not tech savvy, but the platform is really straightforward for me to write and easy for my patients to pay online and receive their orders at home. It's free for practitioners to open a Handcraft Health account. It's just handcraft.health and only takes a few minutes to sign up. It's one of the easiest choices you'll make to do what you do best. And now, back to our episode.
It's been interpreted by this individual, but like what is in the text you're saying is either different or more simple. It's just not there in that fashion in the historical text.
Well, they're not going to talk about the brain and the nervous system. They're not going to talk about things like Lyme disease. Of course, if goo has an association with parasites, that would affect digestion. And if goo makes somebody waste away and has some kind of attachment to their spirit, then you could say that, well, it's built on top of the history, but it's
Yeah.
not what the old books say.
Yeah. Yeah. So when they're talking about goo and it's affecting the digestion, you can use something like your bohe, you can use your zitsuya, you can use these aromatic herbs. We know they help the digestion. We know that they move and open the chi. And then is that their treatment? Do they say other things in the textbooks? Do they make formulas at that point, or are they just saying here's a couple of herbs you could use?
In the Ming and Qing dynasty, there's formulas. One of my books, Raising the Dead and Returning Life, that book has like quite a bit about goo and it has 4 formulas that are based on bohe and zishiye. That's like a good source for that combination and those kind of formulas. And it has 4 different formulas because they're different configurations, but then there are also other formulas for other types of goo. So
Mhm.
it really has a pretty large section on goo and the formulas to treat it. But of course, we still have to diagnose something as goo and decide that it's goo and then use those formulas and see if they work. I'm sure there's other stuff translated. Unschuld talked about it in one of his really early books on the history of medicine, but Unschuld has the ability to turn wine into water. It's like a really interesting topic, and you can make it so academically boring, right? I mean, yeah, he's a great scholar, but that book is also a long time ago, and a lot of things have been thought to be different than they were thought in the time. I mean, that book is probably 40 years old. I don't know.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
lot of academia has been done since then.
Um, in some of these old texts where they're first talking about goo and how to treat it, do they ever combine the goo diagnosis with others? Do they just say, "Oh, we don't know what this is, we're gonna call it goo," or do they ever say, is there some point where they're making a zong fu diagnosis, like, this person has spleen qi deficiency, and this is why they
No.
have gotten goo? No?
I think if you have goo, you have to deal with that before you can deal with anything else.
Okay.
Um, because it's got these powers. But here's something. So the word gu is used actually in much later texts not to mean that thing with the worms and chong and stuff like that. There's a word that's pronounced identically, which means drum, a drum like you're beating a drum. And so there's something called drum distension, which is guzhang, but that gu is pronounced exactly the same way. And sometimes in Chinese, then they write this other gu to mean drum distension, which is like, the abdomen is so big and swollen and veins are sticking out and it's probably like liver failure or cirrhosis, or it's a serious thing when that happens. But sometimes they use those words interchangeably, and that has nothing to do with the insect thing. But what it has to do with is that if you had parasites, you'd also get like a big swollen belly and skinny limbs. It's not just like a large person who has a big belly and big arms, but generally they're skinny, except their abdomen is really protruding. And so that's often what we would call today ascites. So gu now has transformed into this drum distension because it's big and round, and if you flick it, it makes a sound like a drum, right? It got cleaned up to be like a purely medical thing.
With some of the same underlying pathomechanisms where the person is wasting away and deficient, but they have this huge excess pathological conglomeration, whether it's fluid or water or phlegm or bugs that's
so those
killing them, basically.
Became conflated.
Yeah. And what time period was that this was happening?
I don't know how early they first talked about drum distension, but I know in the Ming and Qing dynasty, they started using, the two gu interchangeably for that. While at the same time, some books would still talk about the older meaning of gu, like the poisoning by women that you messed with and you shouldn't have messed with.
I love that. That's my favorite thing about this talk today is learning about that. When we have doctors who are either treating ghosts or now we're talking about gu and giving it more diagnostic physical terminology. Were doctors at this time still interested in other metaphysical ideas, whether it's astrology or feng shui or other things that we might call a replacement of ghosts, but still paranormal or metaphysical?
So ancient people use the calendar a lot to make predictions or to figure out, is this a good day to do this or do that? So there's a lot of calendar arts that are in older medical books that mostly we don't use today. Maybe you're familiar with selecting a point based on the time and date, which one type is called zuoluju. So that's like calendar arts without necessarily being overly metaphysical. And day selection, picking a good day to have a treatment or a day when you should avoid treatment and stuff like that. What else did they have? They used the theory of I Ching, but as far as I've ever found, and I've searched through so many books, there's this webpage called Jicheng, which has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of medical texts in Chinese, historical texts, and you can search it for terms. So I've searched it for terms that relate to divination, and you don't find ancient doctors like using the I Ching to make predictions, but you find them using change theory, the theories of the I Ching to explain relationships. Maybe you've heard heart and kidneys not communicating it's usually described as that fire trigram Li is above and water trigram Kan is below, because fire moves up and water moves down and they don't interact with each other. So that's the type of way they used change theory, not to do predictions. There are some incantations for mental illness, which is hard to treat east or west, and for strange diseases that are having a hard time healing. Yeah, so they used a number of things, but, then there's the ghost possession thing, which, like I said, patients might believe they were possessed by a ghost, but the doctor may or may not have believed that. Oh, there's a particular disease category which might interest you, which is dreaming of intercourse with ghosts.
Oh, that might be the best thing I've heard of today. Tell me more.
So it can basically happen to men or women.
Okay.
Obviously it's having sex dreams. So it would involve seminal emission for people who have penises. Um,
Mhm.
but it would be maybe a regular chronic thing. And for women, I don't think they thought women should have sex dreams. Probably not. But women do, let me tell you. Um, yeah.
They would be very afraid of those women who were having sex dreams. They would be fearful of them.
But generally, what is going to happen is she has a sex dream and nobody knows about it. She's probably not going to complain that she's dreaming about sex. But there are stories of women who would like close themselves in their room and people outside could hear them talking, but there's nobody in the room. Who are they talking to? And they're having these long conversations and they're also wasting away. And so when they talk about somebody who's dreaming of intercourse with ghosts, it usually involves somebody that's showing certain mental illness signs, is
Ah,
what we
okay.
would call it today.
Yep.
They were worried about fox spirits. You don't hear fox spirits in medical books a lot, but foxes could transform into beautiful women and seduce men, or sometimes transform into handsome men and seduce women. And so I think some of this is about when people are not behaving the way everybody else thinks they should in terms of sexuality and stuff like that. They might blame it
Mm,
on fox spirits or whatever. By the way, have you read The Fox Wife? It's a novel. It's
no.
amazing. You would love it. I mean, it's not Chinese medicine, but it's about a fox from her point of view, and it's really quite wonderful. The author actually has another book called The Ghost Bride, which is about sometimes when if you were betrothed to somebody, but he died before you were married, they might have the wedding anyway, and now you're already a widow, and then you go live in your husband's family. Or maybe the guy dies before he even could get married, and then they might pay to have somebody be his ghost bride to make him content in the next world, and also so that she could adopt an heir that would be still considered his heir. Sorry, I can't remember the author's name, but you can find The Fox Wife or The Ghost Bride. It's the same author. She's amazing.
And thinking about the way that there are these cultural ideas explaining things that are metaphysical, things that are paranormal, but also, as you're saying, cultural idea needing to explain either aberrant behavior or behavior that falls outside the norm and putting it into a context that fits for the cultural understanding of deviation. I love the fact that it's then turned into stories and then also ways to then go ahead and treat that.
But today when there's some, shooter or something, everybody wants to know what was his motivation? Why? What's going, it's like instead of just saying, well, this must be a crazy person, which I'm not against trying to find their motivation, but we don't just say, that's a crazy person and move on. We want to know what radicalized them and what was their motivation. And I think it's the same thing when somebody has aberrant behavior. We want an explanation.
Yeah.
And maybe having an explanation is some comfort because, they had this thing. I don't have that thing. So this isn't going to, happen to me. I don't know. Uh,
Yeah. This is very relevant to our understanding of humanity in general. We're talking about treating things medically, but just our understanding of the world and the way people behave
yeah.
and how they think. A lot of this that we're talking about, the ghosts, the goo, we, have some ways to go ahead and treat that, and that's more physical. But did most of that get taken out of the medical textbooks around the time of Mao in the 50s? Did all of that get removed pretty much from Chinese medicine? We see little bits and pieces still, but they don't talk about it anymore.
So it's impossible for one government to take stuff out of Chinese medicine because these books are printed and exist everywhere, the old books. So while they could take it out of what's taught in medical schools today, they could take it out of standard texts, but it's not like that information is not available. It's just not the main thing that's being published in mainland China in medical texts. Although 1949 was a long time ago, and a lot has morphed since then. The communist government today is certainly not identical with the communist government back then. So today things are more loose about what can be published as long as it doesn't get political. I do have a copy of a book that was published in the more early days where stuff is censored out about ghosts. But I have another copy of the same book where I can easily find that information.
Oh,
And they
wow.
don't do that kind of censoring anymore. Or at least maybe they say you can't have that paragraph, but this had like ... where they took out stuff. So it was very obvious where they took out stuff. Maybe for a certain time period, they were publishing old books, but censoring out some of that stuff. But today you can buy all kinds of texts published in China, ancient texts, and they'll have that stuff in it.
Yeah.
It's just modern people are less inclined to diagnose things as goo or as ghosts.
Yeah.
And that started long before 1949, in the end of the 19th century and through the first half of the 20th century. Even if you weren't communist, there was a big move to modernize and to incorporate aspects of Western medicine. The book that I've translated most recently, which isn't yet published, the author, Zheng Yi, is talking about you need to get fresh air and exercise, which is like a Western concept. That's
Yeah.
not a concept that the ancients had for women. And she's talking about the tracheal tube and stuff like that. So the westernization was happening a long time before, and then there were two groups trying to do this, like the communists and the nationalists. You can't pin everything on the communists. There's a lot you can pin on the communists, but this was a trend that was happening throughout Chinese society,
Right.
even if you were anti-communist.
Right. Right. They were having communication with other cultures and different ideas were coming in. And to that point, a lot of this information was preserved through other routes in other countries, right? So other cultures were preserving this information through the spread of the idea. So even if the communists tried to suppress it, whether it was Japan or Korea, or now even a lot of these ideas have been revived through the American practice and the European practice of this medicine, right?
Yeah,
So,
there's a whole Chinese diaspora,
yeah.
so the stuff about ghosts and so forth, I don't know, maybe it was just suppressed for a decade or two, but like now Chinese books will not talk about it as mainstream TCM style, but
Yeah.
it's not forbidden to talk about there
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. In your opinion, now that we're here in the 21st century, modern era practitioners, and we know about all these ideas and we know their historical roots, and then, now we're dealing with so many things in our modern world. Do you think it serves us to translate these ideas into modern terms, or do you think that there is benefit to keeping the original terms and ideas? Like, how should we view these ideas at this point, in your opinion?
I would say if somebody is treating a lot of really difficult diseases or a lot of mental illness, that going back through this kind of stuff can give you clues, but you have to have a treatment that modern people will accept, and you have to have a treatment that has some chance of having success. So some of it is just interesting because it's interesting, but not necessarily something we could use to. But as a translator, my job is not to just make it relevant for the person. My job is to transmit what the author said, and then I can write some commentary on it, or you can draw your own conclusions on it. But I don't picture my job as being interpreting it completely for the modern practitioner. I mean, I don't want to forget practitioners and make it like irrelevant to them, but like somebody else has to data mine my work in
Yeah.
order to find the relevancy for practice. I do think that you can find treasures in there, but you also have to wade through some stuff.
Yep. And then the modern practitioner can always try those things and see what works. Well, I know that a lot of your scholarship and the research for your scholarship throughout the years has included trying out things, making a lot of these old formulas and a lot of the topicals and the balms and seeing really how did they do it and authenticating the ancient recipes. After this episode, I think you really should try that one of getting the what is it, the bugs in the jar and having them duke it out to see who becomes the master bug in the petri dish.
Nah, nah.
No.
I'm not gonna set up a bug fight.
I mean, you could be the first modern person to do this.
No, there may be people who are doing it in China, so
Okay. You had mentioned that you have 1 or 2 new books coming out. Would
oh,
you like to tell our listeners so we can anticipate them and look for them when they're ready?
thank you. So some of you may know I translated Tan Yun-shen's book that was in 10 years ago in 2015. She was a woman doctor who published in 1511 a book of case studies that was almost lost. But now it's found and translated. And then I don't know why 10 years went by in between, but last year, 2024, I guess, I came across there's a woman doctor named Gu Dehua who wrote in the middle of the 1800s, so mid 19th century woman who also wrote a bunch of cases, and her cases were hand copied and passed around. And actually, there's like a bunch of different versions. There's like a 1-volume version and a 4-volume version and a 6-volume version. And there were only hand copied manuscripts, but it might have been 1936. Somebody published the 1-volume version in a collection of rare texts. And so I translated that and did a bunch of research into her. And she lived in the Jiangnan region, which is south, in the region where Wenbing theory came about.
Oh.
And she was really involved in Wenbing, and she was treating serious cases and using warm disease theory for epidemic diseases. And there are all kinds of other things. She treated insomnia or pain or vomiting or gynecology, but there's some really interesting Wenbing cases as well. And so she might discuss theory within a case, but it's not like a theory book. And that should be out before the end of the year. It's at the printer, but things take so long.
Oh, I'm so excited about that.
That's called Medical Cases from the Flower Charm Studio, because
Okay.
the place she wrote, she called the Flower Charm Studio.
And was she I know when you translated the miscellaneous records of the female doctor with Tan Yun-shan, there was a question as to whether she only treated women and if she treated people within the family or whether she treated the whole town or village. Do you know with this doctor that you just recently translated, what kind of a doctor she was?
Oh, sorry. I thought I had. So Tan Yun-shen only treated women as far as I can tell, or maybe some children that might have been male, or maybe if there was an emergency, but she didn't write about that. This woman, Gu Dehua, in the 1-volume thing, it seems like they're all women. You know, there's like gynecology cases, and there's nothing that makes you think one of them is a man, but some of them could be men. But
Hmm.
there's a 4-volume and a 6-volume. Some she did treat men. Mostly she treated women, but she did treat men. And apparently she treated some important person's wife and had like a pretty miraculous cure. And then all of these people started wanting to come to her, including men. But the 1-volume thing is edited by this person who put the collection together, and you can definitely see some stylistic differences between that and the longer versions. He seemed to edit out more of the personal information that's included. Like in the longer versions, it'll say the surname and the street that they lived on, and this is all cut out of the 1-volume thing, which is what I translated. She probably mostly treated women, but also treated men. And then there's a more recent woman who published in 1907. Her name is Zheng Yi, and I've translated that, but it still has to go through the editing process and eventually be printed. Hopefully next year it will come out. And she wrote a book, but that book is not a case study book like the other two. It's like how do you treat this? How do you treat that? How do you treat the next thing? And 1 volume of it is on Wenbing. Again, she saw a lot of epidemics. And then the other volume has miscellaneous diseases like, insomnia and so forth. And then a section on gynecology, and then a section on pediatrics, and then a section on mostly dermatology. And she makes it seem like she only treated family members, but I don't think that's the case. I think she's weird. She's kind of a feminist because she thinks women are equal to men, but she thinks there should be like a gender apartheid and that women should still stay home and men go out. And so she didn't talk about treating any men except her husband and her son. But it's not case studies. I don't know who her clients are, but I think she probably treated a certain amount of men.
Yeah. I think I said this the last time that we did an interview, but I just wanted to, again, thank you for bringing these words of women doctors, educated women, women who were out there helping people, curing people. They've been silent for so long. And within our medicine, we've had so few women's voices. So it's very important work that you're doing. And I know that myself, but m- we all appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
My last question for you, given that this is our Ghost and Goo Day, do you have any personal experiences of any paranormal activity in your own life? Any ghosts or goo that you would like to share? Any stories with us?
So I live too much in my left brain, which means right-handed, and
Very
so I
logical,
think
right?
I'm not very good. I live with my intellect, and I'm not saying my intellect is all that, but I don't have that kind of perception. And in a way, it's good because I know some people who are really troubled by seeing all kinds of stuff. Maybe it's mental illness. I don't know. But it's kind of nice to be left alone by the ghosts. Anyway, so I don't have that kind of experience. But I've found that even though I don't consider myself an intuitive person, if it's like something urgent, somehow something comes through. So the example is when my daughter was maybe 4 years old, I lived on this street in Venice, California. And, there's some gang activity there at the time. And so I had picked her up from daycare and I was driving home and about to park in front of my house. And something just suddenly told me, don't park, put it in reverse and go back as fast as you can. It still freaks me out. And so as soon as I started backing up, a car comes around the corner and starts shooting at somebody who is right where I was parking. And I'm pushing my daughter's head down and she's saying, what's happening? What's happening? And I'm pushing
Oh
her
my
down and going in
gosh.
reverse as fast as I can. But how would I have known it was around the corner. It was not visible. How did I know?
Wow.
So,
Wow.
you know, I thank the deities or whatever.
Oh my gosh. Well, geez, that's the best kind of ghost or paranormal activity. It was helpful to you, and
Someone was
pro
protecting me.
yeah, it was protecting you. That's
Uh,
amazing.
I was just shaking.
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think we all have to remain open to the idea that while spooky ghosts probably aren't around every corner impacting our daily life, there's always the possibility that there are connections and there are other dimensions and there's something out there. Who knows?
I'm agnostic about all of it. I don't disbelieve, but I don't really believe either.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, at least this time of year for this Halloween episode that we're doing, we got to discuss some of the historical foundations for understandings of ghosts and goo. Hang on, let me play my one more time. Dr. Lorraine, thank you so much for sitting down with me today to talk to our listeners about this very interesting topic and share these historical understandings of ghost and goo. For all of our listeners, if you guys want to learn more about Lorraine, she's very easy to find on the internet. She has her own YouTube channel. She teaches CEUs, and you have numerous articles. You have your books that you have written and 2 more coming out, and you're on social media as well. You curate some, Facebook groups for scholars and practitioners of East Asian medicine. So people can find you very easily and learn more from you anytime they want.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you always, and we'll continue to have you come back here and talk about more interesting
It
topics in
was
the future.
fun.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. That's all for today's episode of Elevated Practice. I'd like to express my gratitude to our guests today and always for sharing their wisdom with all our listeners. I hope you were able to take away some insights, practical knowledge, or inspirational ideas that you can apply right away to elevate your own practice. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about Elevated Practice. If you have an idea for an episode or a recommendation for a guest, please respond in the comments or message me, Gretchen Badami, directly through social media. Thank you, and I can't wait for you to hear our next episode.